Most people think survival is about gear, knives and fire starters, fancy kits like we see on social media all the time. But in reality, survival is usually about the basics: water, heat, psychology, the decisions you make when things start going wrong. And today I'm speaking to Walther Meyer from Wildmedix about the survival scenarios people actually face, specifically in a Southern or a South African context, the myths around survival gear and why surviving in South Africa often looks very different from what most advice tells you. Walter,
Hello, Rian. Good to be
morning.
back with you.
Yeah, it's early morning, but we're on it.
Yeah. We both know that survival's all about coffee,
Without coffee, you doesn't matter what kit you talk about, you're a goner. That's just the way it is. You can basically leave everything out and just sit under a tree and wait for it, as far as I'm concerned. So,
Yeah. You might
well,
not die without coffee, but you'd want to.
well, give it 2 days, and you'll definitely you start thinking maybe it's time. Maybe it's time. Well, let's get into this. When someone realizes that they are lost, which happens, what actually changes between misplaced for maybe a few hours and maybe as opposed to survival overnight or maybe for several days? If you're looking at things from a psychological perspective, mentally, strategically, I'm thinking scenarios like your car breaks down somewhere, and you're stuck. Maybe in the Bundus, maybe not. Urban survival. When our systems fail, these are realities, and it can, at some stage, have such a catastrophic survival. We're doing survival in any case as is, because even though we passed the old load shedding for most part, the system is very old and not well maintained. So things break and things get sabotaged. And so it happens, even here in a big city like Pretoria, it happens where people are suddenly, one moment they're functioning normally, and the next moment the electricity goes off, and they get it back a week later, because stuff broke that takes days or longer to replace. These things are real. That's a form of survival, don't you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, look, we have vast differences between, I think, wilderness and urban
Yes.
survival. And, when you ask about getting lost, there's also vast differences, but I guess, between lost in the city and lost in the mountains. In a way, I would rather be lost in the mountains than lost in the city, to be honest. But
Yeah.
I guess, I guess it depends what you're comfortable with.
Yes.
That's just me. But if we talk about getting lost in the wilderness, and you ask that question about what it's the first few hours of kind of thinking that you might be lost versus realizing, well, God, now I am properly lost. There are differences. If you can still find yourself on a map, and you can kind of figure out your location, even if you're not where you want to be, then you're not properly lost yet. If you're at that point where you actually have no idea where the hell you are, I mean, you might know, okay, I'm in this province. I hope at least that, unless you're completely out of it, right? You've got kind of an idea where you are, but that if you can't pinpoint yourself on a map,
But now
now this is,
I
and I mean, this could be on the roads as well. So if you don't know how to read an old school road map book,
that's
which most of the newer generation and so on don't know how to
that's what
do.
I wanted to say, because I
Um,
actually know people who, if you drop them in a neighborhood they haven't been in, they wouldn't be able to pinpoint themselves on a map. So
exactly.
it doesn't have to be
But
complicated.
the difference there, I guess, is under normal circumstances, you can just suck up the manliness and put it in your pocket for a while and ask for directions. When you're lost in the wilderness, if you're alone and there's nobody to ask for directions, that's a bit of a different story.
Yes.
You ask the crows or something, but when the crows start circling over you, you're probably in trouble.
It's a bit lighter on the ego, though, because, I don't know any guy who likes asking for directions. It's just, it chips away at the ego, man. If you have to stop somewhere and ask directions.
Yeah, but so if you look at say hikers or guys who find themselves on foot due to circumstance such as you have a vehicle breakdown, there's no comms, and at some point the guy decides to start walking. It's very easy to at first fool yourself as well, and the trick is almost to be self-aware, to the sense that if you realize, look, I don't really know where I'm going, or I don't know where I am, then the first thing is, stop and try and figure out where you are, even if it starts with a vague idea of where you are.
Yes.
And then you work from there. It also, of course, keep in mind that if you're in a situation where you have no map, for instance, then how do you figure out where you are unless you know the environment? So these are it's all tricky situations, and all of these situations are going to differ. I think what people often do at first when they're lost is they start wandering around, or the typical thing is to try and find a spot where I can climb up to and look into the distance, which makes sense because when, if you can see something in the distance, suddenly you might realize where you are. Some of the things, if you look at stories of lost people and statistics on lost people, is of course that is often what also gets them into trouble, is when they start climbing up things without the knowledge and skills to climb things, and get themselves into a world of trouble by climbing up things, or then, of course, when falling off those things, or getting stuck somewhere on a cliffside or something in pursuit of high ground. So I think the first thing is to just be sensible about it, and as I said, be self-aware. So realize, listen, I'm possibly lost now, or I might get lost. Even if it's an area which you think if I take, for instance, say Table Mountain, I've walked on the back table especially, and I know it fairly well, and I walk on the back table in the mist, for instance, or in a cloud, and you can't see your hand in front of you. If you stick your arm out, your hand disappears there in the mist. And even if you know the place, you suddenly like, whoa, okay, I better concentrate, just where am I going? And maybe I need to pull out a map, or look at, make sure that things that I would normally just blindly walk, you suddenly have to concentrate on. And I think those are the first things when you get lost, is make sure you concentrate, wake up, look around, make a plan.
Be in the
make
moment.
A plan.
Focus.
Yeah, because remember, the further you walk, the harder it also becomes for other people to find you. So if there's somebody looking for you, and you're walking 4 or 5 kilometers an hour in a certain direction, and they have to say grid search for you, they end up doing a grid search like this, and you're going, okay, does it make sense? So that it becomes quite difficult to catch you if somebody's looking for you like that. So sometimes, just think, stop, make a plan. Also, don't, this is always obviously the cliche answer is don't panic. So there's a time for panic later. Don't panic now, because make stupid decisions when you panic as well.
Yes.
So, and of course, being well prepared in the first hand will hopefully reduce the amount of panicking you do. But yeah, there's, I think as time progresses, I think to answer your original question, as time progresses, people actually become more panicky, and when things set in, like, if I'm lost early in the morning on my hike and I still have full water bottles and I still have my day food with me, then I'm more comfortable. And yeah, by the afternoon, I've used the food, I'm run out of water, I'm very thirsty now, my tongue is sticking to the roof of my mouth, that type of thing. I can see if the day is getting long now, it's going to be dark soon. And of course, that changes the game again for most people. Once it starts getting dark, The psychology is very different once it's dark.
And a lot
And
of people are actually totally scared of the dark. That's a fact.
absolutely. I think also keep in mind if you're in a wilderness situation, especially if it's a first time, so you get chucked in there by accident, or you've only in your life ever done a few day walks, and suddenly you're overnight in the wilderness, and you come from a city environment, then you don't know darkness actually, because most cities are never properly dark.
Yes.
Even us in South Africa attempted that with load shedding to make the cities properly dark. But generally not, because somebody's making light somewhere,
Yep.
or there are vehicles and brake lights and whatever, there's light. When you're in the wild, and there's nobody around and you have no torch or whatever, especially if it's not a moonlit night or the phase before the moon's out, it can be very, very dark, and people misunderstand that. It's something that I've experienced with outer education groups, that some kids have actually never experienced darkness, or have never experienced being solo, alone. And because they're just never alone, even if they go to the bathroom, there's somebody on the other side of the door in the kitchen or in the hallway or whatever, they're never really alone. And to suddenly experience that aloneness and the darkness can be overwhelming for people.
I think in the city, the closest I've come to matching that sort of darkness is in a movie theater when the power went off. And then for like a minute or so there, until the backup started kicking in and some of the lights came back on, that darkness is so complete that I couldn't see the person next to me.
Yeah, but that's a little bit like being in a cave rather than just being in the wilderness. But
that's very dark. That's as dark as a politician's soul.
Yeah, no, that gets.
There's two scenarios that I personally like watching videos on YouTube with people who do survival stuff. And there's one thing that always stands out for me. It's always, whether it's a guy or a girl who's presenting this, it's always this very fit, healthy, good-looking people. If it's a girl, a lot of them wear these skimpy clothes to make it more, I don't know, enticing. Watch as I walk through the wilderness, and they build.
This is why I don't have a YouTube channel.
and
I won't sell clicks in a skimpy outfit.
They build shelters, and they fit. But in reality, if you get lost, maybe you are old and you are maybe sick, maybe you are injured in some way, maybe you've got dependents with you, maybe you're just overweight and unfit. You're not that fit, healthy, slim individual that you see in the YouTube video. So that surely must change the circumstances that you'll find yourself in and that you need to be working with if you get into a situation like that.
Yeah, look, obviously being fit and healthy is going to help you in that situation. I do think that, you do not have to look like your favorite YouTube star or, something that...
I can't look like her even if I want to.
Yeah. I don't think that is necessarily realistic anyway for most people. Although, of course, that also is not necessarily a sign of health. In my experience as a mountain guide, for instance, working with lots of different people over the years, what I found on many expeditions, at the stage I often took groups to Kilimanjaro, for instance. Often the fat smokers actually held up better than these guys who look like they've just popped off a Men's Health cover,
Yeah.
And the reason for that was because they actually slow and steady wins the race. they don't really panic about anything because they already decided they're dead. They don't care. So, you know, yeah, and actually, they actually did better in many circumstances. Also,
Oh,
look, yeah, one has to be careful of thinking about this, but if you've got 1 or 2 extra kilos, sometimes that's helpful in that kind of situation because there's a little bit to burn, but not excessively so. You know, if you're 20, 30, 40 kilos overweight, then it becomes an issue.
yes.
That being said, there are lots of guys who function incredibly well, although they're beefy. You know, they can climb, they can hike, they can run, they can do all kinds of things, but that's kind of, it's more of an exception. But anyway, in terms of your deciding how you approach stuff, it's also, you know, like you said, now you may have other people with you. It's easy to talk to this about this stuff from a perspective of being alone, because when you're alone, you only make decisions for yourself. So if you decide to sit and wait, then it's your decision. If you decide to hike out, that's your decision, and you live with your decision. The moment you start making those decisions for other people, it changes the game. And then you do have to consider those people. So people tend to, you know, if you open a hiking textbook, for instance, one of the first things it will tell you is never split the party. You know, it'll have us 10 rules of hiking or something. Never hike alone, never split the party, never go less than 5 people or 4 people or whatever it might be. You know, we've got these things now, but those are, of course, their guidelines for, you know, and they're perfect world scenarios, but very often people don't hike in a party of 4, they hike in a party of 3 or 2 or 1, and or more. You know, you're hiking in a party of 15. And at some point, it influences your decision. So if you've got older people or frail people, smaller children and so on, it might not be ideal to take them with you if you want to hike out. So you may have to leave them somewhere and then come back or organize help. And then you have to make sure that they are safe where they are going to stay. So you need to set up that in advance, make sure they have everything they need, and then inform them of the plan. If you're going to hike out of somewhere alone, obviously that increases the risk for you, because if you're then injured or something happens, then you know, you have nobody to look after you, or you're completely stuck. So it's a very good idea that you have an exact plan of what you're going to do. They know what time to expect you out. And then also maybe set up a time when you say, look, which is more in the future. So if you think it's going to take you 24 hours to walk out, then they should know that, and they should only start worrying about you maybe 72 hours later or something like that, because there may be delays, you may take longer, because the last thing you want is when those people to start panicking as well. So, but that's a very intricate situation, and maybe the best decision for everybody to just wait and hopefully help arrives with you, but that's going to depend on the situation.
Okay. Let's talk about dehydration. There are obviously, as always, many myths floating around. And, you know, people tend to think they know dehydration. But what would you say are the biggest myths that can actually get people into trouble?
You know, Rian, I think one of the most common ones I've come across is that people believe that you cannot dehydrate when it's cold or cooler, or you cannot dehydrate when it's raining, something like that. I can't dehydrate because it's snowing, things like that. That's a big myth. So you will dehydrate regardless of the weather. You might dehydrate slower if it's cool, but you're still going to dehydrate. Everything you do, if you're working, if you're functioning, if you're breathing, you're busy dehydrating. And at some point you are going to need water. The other thing is, especially if it's really cold, so if it's snowing or there's ice around you, then often people think that, well, I've got all the snow, so I don't need, you know, it's easy now because I just melt the snow for water. To melt enough snow for a cup of coffee, you need a giant pot of snow, and you need something to melt it with. It doesn't just melt. If you scoop up a pot of snow and it's cool and you just put it down there, it's going to take ages for it to melt. So you need a stove or something to heat it with. and it takes an enormous amount of fuel. So if you've got a camping stove or one of these hiking stoves or something with you, you'll be surprised how much fuel you burn to try and melt snow. Especially for a group of people, it's mind-boggling when you work it out. Then one of the other issues as well with ice cold water. So even if it's not frozen, if it's just really, really cold water, it doesn't really hydrate you immediately. So if you drink a bottle of freezing water, it fills your belly up basically, or your tummy up, and you feel full, but it doesn't immediately absorb for hydration purposes. Your body needs to heat that water up.
Yes.
Up to a point where it's warm enough to absorb it and to effectively use it for hydration. Okay. And that takes fuel and energy to do that. So the more that ice cold water you drink, the more fuel you're going to need. So if you're out of food, drinking that ice cold water is possibly not the best idea. I would try and scoop that water and then try and, even if you let it stand in the sun in a bottle, or you stick it under your armpit, inside your jacket for a while, whatever. If that's an option, if you're warm enough that you can tolerate that, then warm that water up before you drink it, because that's actually going to absorb quicker and you're going to need less of it.
So in a real world situation, which is harder, finding water or making it safe to drink?
Yeah, that's it's going to really depend where you are, because properly making water safe is, it's a timeless process. It's not something that's super quick unless you have, something like a high-end water filter with you or something. Then, if you've got one of those Catadin or MSR water filtering pumps with you, you can treat water pretty quickly. But if you're using tablets, or you have to make a filter and then filter it and so forth, but that takes a lot of time to do. So, and knowledge, using one of those filter pumps, if most people can figure that out, even if they've never seen it. But making a water filter yourself, for instance, from materials on the land, for instance, that's difficult. So that could take quite a long time. Finding water, there are some basic rules for finding water. Doesn't mean you're necessarily going to find it, but it could be easier if you know those rules, or easier. I don't want to say easy, but it's if you know the basic rules, finding some sort of water source is probably easier than filtering really dirty water.
Okay.
But it's subjective, right? It depends on the situation and where you find yourself.
If you happen to be carrying a bottle of whiskey with you at that stage, you don't really have to worry about finding water or filtering water.
Yeah, for sure. You see, and you won't care. So it's all.
And you won't care. Do you think food matters as much as you would want it to do, or does it matter less than that? And I also want to touch on energy conservation, because I think you've been talking about energy. So to me, I think that the preservation of energy in itself can be a survival skill. I don't know if it's correct if I make a statement like that.
Yeah.
And also electrolytes, how important are they? You said electrolytes is like a day-long lecture in itself, so I don't want to go into that depth. I just want to basically check, are they important?
Look, the first thing is, water is way more important than food. You can go a lot longer without food. In fact, most people could go weeks without food. You're not going to feel well, you're not going to enjoy it, but you can survive quite long without food.
Yes.
Water, depending on the situation, maybe 3 or 4 days without water, and very soon you're, a lot sooner than dying, you're going to have problems from not having water. So water is always a first priority. Shelter, in fact, is a bigger priority as well, especially if it's really cold. obviously from warmth as well, but that's often easier. Just sit under a tree or something, or find a bush or some shade. That's easier than finding a storm shelter, right? But yeah, so one of the first things especially if it's really cold, is actually get shelter first, then worry about water, then worry about food later. So it's not an immediate priority to find food. Okay. Electrolytes, they are important, but they at first, a lot of the things that you might find from them is almost comfort things, in a sense. So you might find that if you're dehydrating and you're in the heat, you might start getting cramps and so forth, for which electrolytes will help. If you're in a wild situation, you might not have supplemental electrolytes. It's great if you have a first aid kit and you've got a few bags of electrolytes, you can use them when you need them. But if you don't have them, or generally, I mean, if you think about it, most people don't drink electrolytes every day. You get them out of the foods that you eat and the salts that you take in and so on. They are medically or first aid wise, where they become the most important is when the person has diarrhea or vomiting. Either from whatever reason they have diarrhea and vomiting, then electrolyte replacement becomes more important. If you're not ill and you're just not eating, it's going to take quite a while before it becomes a big issue. If I have one or two sachets of the stuff in the first aid kit, I'm also not going to start using them immediately. I will use them as and when I need them. Okay. The thing about that is you do need to have an understanding about those things first aid wise to make that decision wisely. But yeah, I wouldn't drink them as cool drink. You know what I mean? I would keep them for if I need them. I think one of the big things is avoid dehydration and activity. So if you are lost and you need to walk out and it's super hot and you don't have water, whatever, I would wait until it's cooler. So late afternoon, early evening, or very early in the morning. Those are the times I would walk, and then I would rather shelter during the warm parts of the day to avoid requiring electrolytes and completely dehydrating.
Well, that sort of touches on the energy conservation part for me as well. I saw that you were nodding when I made a statement saying that it's a survival skill. So I think you agree with me on that one.
Right.
What is good and disciplined energy conservation in a situation like that? Not talking, does that help?
Yeah, look, it would obviously, I guess talking versus sitting quietly would conserve some energy. I don't know at what speed you're talking or you have with you, but some
people talk.
People do talk. I think that possibly goes more to the psychology of a situation, but in terms of energy conservation, like I said in the previous question, is firstly try and do things in the cooler times of the day, and then don't do unnecessary things. Okay, conserve that energy for things that are useful skills or useful tasks that you are performing. So if you're stuck there next to your broken car and you have nothing to do, don't wash the car. Okay, it's sort of it's things like that. Is, to be. I know it's a stupid example, but yeah, it's don't do unnecessary things. Rather aim towards the things that you need for survival at that stage, or I don't know, if you're bored, don't start playing soccer, whatever, kicking a hacky sack around. It's rather, I don't know, do a jigsaw puzzle if you're bored, right? It's, it will conserve that energy. It is important, especially if you don't know how long you're going to be there and you don't know when your next meal is going to be.
So do less, not more.
Do what's necessary.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, you mentioned the psychology of the whole thing. So let's touch on that. Why do people still panic even if they are well equipped with good gear and they should one assumes be prepared. Where does hope come in and where does realism kick in, type of thing, decision
Um,
fatigue, etc.
yeah, I think, experience talks to a lot of that. It's one thing to have a bunch of equipment, but if you've never used that equipment, or you've only watched that lady with the tiny shorts or whatever on a survival video on YouTube use the equipment, it doesn't mean you know suddenly how to set this thing up or how to use it. So that, I think that's for one reason. The other thing is some of the things we mentioned earlier is, just the idea of, oh, cut, I'm lost now, or I'm going to be alone, or I'm going to be alone through the night. That for a lot of people is incredibly nerve-wracking. So yeah, it really depends. Or maybe you bought, I don't know, your survival gear on Timo or something. Now you're trying to, you suddenly realize that commando knife saw thing that you got or whatever is not really cutting. It is. It can be various things, but I think we have the actual psychology of being alone, and it's like they say, the certain time of the night, all the shadows get longer and all the paranoia comes out.
You start hearing noises
You start hearing
and
things or seeing things.
I experienced that actually last weekend. I went to a wedding just outside of town, about 20 kilos out between Pretoria and Bronkhorstspruit. Stunning venue, and they've got this wood area there because there's like an open air chapel in the wood, but there's walkways and stuff. So at night they light up the walkways. Okay, I went walking there, I don't know, about maybe 11ish or so. But being me, because I like being in the dark, I stepped off the pathway and I walked into the wood itself, and just stood there for, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes just to take it in because I like it. It works for me. And it was pretty in your face how suddenly you were hearing rustling noises in the dark, because now it was pretty proper dark. I mean, still not fully dark, but it was pretty damn dark. Suddenly you hear these rustling noises. You hear trees clanking against each other, thunking against each other. You hear the branches creaking and moving, all kinds of noises that you normally don't hear.
And
It's
you're
like,
wondering, is it Bigfoot or a really big Mozambique spitting cobra?
and most of the time, maybe it's just some field mouse running around, scavenging for
Over
food.
wind.
And the sounds just popped, like almost as if I had headphones on. So it was actually pretty amazing how the usual set of sounds got replaced by this, let's call it bush set of sounds, almost at the flick of a switch. And I can get that can be disconcerting, or that can even get someone to panic, or to start seeing things or thinking, they're after me or something. I actually get that, especially if you're coming from the city.
Mhm. Yeah, no, absolutely. The mind plays games, I think in any survival situation, it's interesting. One of the things that you want is something to, secure your sanity, to keep you sane, so to speak. So, and the longer the survival situation is, the more you would need that, whether it's, I don't know, a deck of cards or a book, or I don't know, the back of a maintenance P or something to read that, but something to keep you locked into some normalcy or some sanity is a good thing. I mean, that's, wilderness survival. It's, you might not have something like that, but sometimes a small little book or something. I don't know, one of those tiny Bibles from the Gideons, something like that would do well, if you, or something else like that to read. It's useful thing to have in a pack. It's very interesting. There's my wife's got a sample of a snakebite kit here from the 1950s.
Yeah.
It was one of the South African ones. It's a Fitzsimmons. So she's got a whole collection of his old snakebite kits. But anyway, the comprehensive tin, a whole bunch of things in there, but also a really tiny little Bible, one of the smallest little Bibles I've ever seen. It's only, I think it's only Psalms and whatever else. It's not a full Bible, but or maybe it's just New Testament, but it's really tiny. And it says on the cover something like for salvation and salvation and peace or something like that. But it was included in the first aid kit in the 1950s, that you had this tiny little Bible, to keep you sane. And I think there's some, there's definitely some, it shows you the importance actually of a psychological part of survival.
Yeah, somebody gave it some thought, I reckon. There's this almost, I think it's maybe it's like a human instinct to keep moving, which isn't necessarily always the best decision. How do you figure out when to stop, when to take shelter, when to move? How do you figure these things out when you sit in a situation like that?
Look, I think firstly, you've got to assess your situation and come up with a plan. Okay, don't just wander off with no plan. So have a plan. Then also be ready to change your plan as things, adapt during the day. So be flexible. Flexibility is very important in a situation like this. Don't, I have to stick to the original plan. If it's not safe or something happens and you realize, that was a bad plan, then, change your plans. Then, like I said earlier, plan when to move. So if I have to move, I'm not going to walk at the hottest or whatever times of the day, in the blazing sun. I'm going to wait for late afternoon, walk into the night. Then maybe if it gets so dark that it's not safe, then sleep a few hours or sit a few hours and wait, which of course is difficult. It's a hard thing to do, so you sit there for hours twiddling your thumbs and all the shadows are getting longer, so I do understand why people want to walk in that situation, but sometimes you can easily walk at night, especially depending on moonlight and that sort of thing. But sometimes you just can't safely walk. The terrain's bad and it's too dark, then rather sit and wait until you can see, then walk again in the early hours of the morning and then wait if you need to again, and it's a process. So that's a bit of a psychological game. And especially if you can maybe in the distance start seeing the end goal, so you start seeing, there's something, whatever, there's a water tower in the distance or something, but that thing's still 20 or 50 kilometers away or something. When that anxiety to push it there might be a bad thing, maybe wait. But anyway, that's it all depends on the situation. And then, decide, make your plan with the knowledge and based on the situation. So it's all starts with assessing your situation and being logical and, realistic about what it is that I'm facing and what are my capabilities.
What if you, with your knowledge, had to open the average survival kit, what would make you go, oh, you didn't just do that?
I'm assuming you're talking about these kind of pre-packed shop bought survival kits and things.
Generally, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so look, they vary. I think the quality is generally it's dubious. Also, if you're buying a comprehensive survival kit for $4.99 or something like that, maybe reconsider. It's these things, quality items like that, they are expensive. They're not cheap. That being said, you don't necessarily need a handmade collectible knife or something like that. There are lots of good budget knives and things about, or tools about, or whatever it is that you're looking for. But generally, I think what I've experienced is you do get what you pay for, which is quite important. Then I think also some of these survival kits, they come in sealed containers, for instance. So you'll have a survival kit in a can or something like that, which is it's a funny thing to maybe give to a kid at a birthday party, or to get your kids interested in survival or bushcraft or something, which is fine. I have no problem with that. But the issue with those things, for instance, is once you open them, the whole thing is open and you can't seal it again. Which also means I can't practice with it. I can't check the quality. So if you're going to do something, so, I don't know, count on your survival kit in a can, then maybe buy two and open one and actually check what the hell is in there before you count on this thing that's been living in your backpack for 30 years. I think, honestly, like I said, the quality is often the issue. Even things like, people like to pack things like ferro rods, for making fire to strike and that sort of thing. Now, those things also, they differ greatly in quality.
Yeah.
Is it actually working? Is it not? And then on the other hand, I want to tell you that it's always easier using a big lighter than it is to use a ferro rod. So if I'm going to pack I'm going to pack a lighter and some matches and stuff, and then maybe my ferro rod, and that will be my last resort. But the other thing, you got to obviously practice with this stuff. But in terms of your question on the kits, is it a gimmick? Is it just a way of selling a bunch of nonsense that's made by the lowest bidder somewhere? Or has there actually gone any thought into this thing? Who packed it? Is it packed to be a novelty item, or is it packed to be an actual serious kit? Now, actual serious kit it'll be more expensive, and
Sure.
You'll be able to see what thought has gone into it. And I'm actually more in favor of a thing where you make up your own stuff. Don't go and buy those pre-packed stuff. It's, as I said, it's fine as a novelty item, or it's fine to get kids interested in stuff and so on. But it's I bought a lot of that stuff when I was a child, and that's got me interested in it and where I am and what I do today. But it's I wouldn't necessarily really want to be out there surviving on those things. It's okay if you're building a fort in the veld behind the house, but it's not that cool if you can't go home and get a meal from your mom.
Can you think, talking about that, can you think of an inexpensive, maybe often overlooked piece of gear that actually consistently proves its value?
Yeah, so I think a thing that maybe that a lot of people know are those little silver mylar blankets, the emergency blanket.
Yes.
They're sometimes incorrectly called a space blanket. Okay, so I think people need to just understand that a space blanket is actually the heavier one with the two colors. So the one side is normally silver, and the other side is it's often red or blue or green or orange or something like that. And it's more like a top pole, and it's a bit more of a heavy-duty thing. So that's a space blanket. And the emergency blanket is that tiny little matchbox size thing, or double matchbox size thing that's folded up. Now, that emergency blanket, you find it a lot in first aid kits, and of course in hiking kits and so on. A lot of people have those. Now, that's an interesting thing. So firstly, some people think that thing is ultimate survival. It can do everything. I can make a shelter, I can make a ground sheet, I can whatever. It's now, in a way, you can use that thing for a lot of it, but it's all about how you use it. For instance, if it's really cold and you go and lie underneath that thing and there's a wind blowing, it's not going to do much for you. Okay, if the wind blows right under it, it's not going to keep you warm. So it's a piece of equipment that is very useful. It's very good to have, but it absolutely relies on having the knowledge how to use it. So things like that this is hard to describe in short, but it's best fed under your clothes. So if you were wearing something like this, for instance, you would feed it between the shirt and the jacket, wrap it around. You have a jacket on the outside, zip it up. Whoop, okay, so the mylar is sitting underneath, and it becomes a vapor barrier. Then it works quite efficiently. If you sit under it and you lie under it, or you wrap it over like a TV blanket, it doesn't do the job that you expect it to do. And I think that's a good example of things that people misunderstand and own and not know how to use. The other interesting one, which you often come across with hiking, nowadays it's less common, but in the days gone by, If you went on a hiking trip, you'd always find some guy with a compass around his neck, And then if you actually talk to him, you realize he doesn't actually know how to use the compass. So most people will say, oh, well, a compass shows me north. A compass doesn't show you north. It shows you magnetic north, firstly. And then it can show you north, but you need to know how to use it to get it to show north. Okay. It doesn't automatically show north. So it's things like that. So it's another piece of equipment that people often, they think owning it is safety. I think the modern equivalent of that is possibly the GPS, where people think a GPS will just navigate me out of everything. Doesn't work like that either. You need to know how to follow it, how to set routes on it, how to program it. And then the other thing is it runs out of power and batteries, and it falls on a rock, and then it's broken, and then you've got a problem.
A week or so ago, family came to visit my dad. They are from the Cape, so they don't know the city. And they got lost on their GPS. And the route they came in from Hartbeespoort Dam side took them through the city center. And when they told me, I thought, but how? And then I realized, but they don't know. So if the GPS says this, you're not going to necessarily think of maybe asking questions of the GPS. You just assume that it's going to do it properly. And
especially street level navigation, it's actually
not always
often worse than you think.
Yes, yeah, no.
I know exactly what you're talking about. So if you drive into Pretoria from Hartbeespoort, it gives you the options, and then you can either go around the Voortrekker Monument, or you go through the city at the bottom. You go there past the old Paul Kruger building and stuff, which looks like Lagos, and it's not the place where you want to be if you've never been there before. You get scared out of it.
So that's
like you're in a war-torn area.
It can happen that easily with modern tools. I want to touch on something like a multi-tool. Are you more in favor of that versus maybe some sort of a dedicated tool?
Okay, so look, dedicated tools always work better. If you think about a proper Nipex plier or something is always going to outperform your multi-tool. If or a proper big knife is going to outperform the blade on a multi-tool. I think the issue is it's about what you have with you. It's kind of a gun in the safe or a gun on your belt scenario. I'll rather have my 38 snubby on my belt than have a Desert Eagle 50 in the safe. It's just, what are your choices? So your issue with with that is if you go on a hiking trip, you're not going to have a whole toolbox of tools with you. If you're vehicle based, you can definitely have some proper tools with you. And I think that, that's possibly, again, a whole discussion on its own, but I would always have a proper set of tools in my vehicle. It's not a giant toolbox. I'm not an expert mechanic or anything like that, so I carry what I know how to use. But I would rather be attempting to change a pipe, a burst pipe or something like that with a proper set of tools, and doing that with a multi-tool. I'm not saying a multi-tool cannot do that. You can do a lot of things with a multi-tool.
Yes.
But if you have a choice, I would rather have a dedicated tools. But then if you go hiking, for instance, or whatever, then a multi-tool is maybe what you'll be carrying. And I think there again, that's the difference between a heavy tool or a lighter tool. If you go hiking, and you only own a giant toolbox size multi-tool, a lot of people are going to go, oh, am I carrying this thing with me? And they go, nope, leave it behind rather. Whereas if you've got a lightweight one, you're more likely to take it. If I think that, I love all these tools and things, knives and so on, so I've got a few of them, but I've got the tiny Leverman skeleton tool, for instance, and I've often used that more than I use my bigger tools. I certainly have used it more than I've used my bigger tools in my life. And the reason for that is it's because the one I normally have with me, because it's light, so it ends up sitting in a pocket, whereas the big one is in a bag in the car. That's normally the closest, and you end up with this one in your pocket. So yeah, it's what you can have with you and what you are willing to carry, and yeah, doesn't help it's on the coffee table at home.
My last question on this subject before we move on to the next and last question for the conversation. We always hear, and I mean, it's said very often that skills beats gear. Is there a point when that statement stops being true?
Look, at some point in time, the two needs each other. You know, there's a thing as well where you can have a lot of skills, and when you don't have the tools or you don't have the gear that goes with those skills, and then you're stuck, or you're going to at least underperform with your skill. So there's definitely a point where the two requires each other. And then there are certain things where, you know, for instance, if you have your two-person mountain tent with you, that's probably better, more efficient, quicker shelter than it is for you to try and build one from fynbos, right? So it's always going to beat that skill. You know, so having the skill, being able to say build a shelter is important. But if I have a shelter, I'm going to use the shelter that I have. I'm not going to waste energy and time on building a shelter if I have a decent tent, for instance. Okay, so the same with sleeping bags, for instance. If I have a sleeping bag with me, a nice, modern, comfortable sleeping bag is going to be better than, I don't know, trying to build some insulation from Slangbos, you know, or whatever. So it's, you know, there are just cases where the gear is better, or like I said, where the two meets each other. It's okay. No use. You've got the best knife skills in the world, and you can carve a rocket from a piece of timber, but you don't have your knife with you. So.
Is heat exposure, specifically in South Africa, because, you know, we tend to get, most places in any case tends to get very hot in summer. Do you think the sun is a bigger killer than people realize?
Look, it can be. I think it's an interesting thing where I think almost what it does, the typical warmer climate, is it makes people think that it will always be like that. So I think more people actually get in trouble because of cold. You know, maybe on a day-to-day basis, you know, your mild dehydration and your sunburn and so forth, certainly that is more of an issue than, you know, you don't have, again, in my town over Christmas, you don't have a lot of people becoming hypothermic, but a lot of them are, you know, look like red tomatoes and Speedos with a beer on their head. But it's, you know, that's a different story. When I think what the general warmer climate does is that people don't prepare for the cold, and they're often inexperienced for dealing with the cold rather than the heat. You know, a lot of, especially people who live here, we know it's warm, so we prepare, and we've got hats and whatever you need. You've got a long sleeve shirt, you've got these things, but you learn that, you know, or you were taught that from a young age. But then, and the same with travelers who come into Africa or anywhere, they, you know, foreigners always think Africa is warm, and they prepare for the warm. And when they go out, especially into the mountainous areas, when they're surprised about how cold it is. A friend said to me the other day, for instance, it was quite pleasant in the city in Cape Town. It was sort of 22, 23 degrees in the city, and then he went up onto the mountain, and when he got on top, there was cloud on, and he was measuring 5 degrees or something on his, you know, on a thermometer on his wristwatch. And it's a big difference, you know. It's and think about it, in Table Mountain, you could, if you're using the cable car, you could get from the city to the top of the mountain in minutes in theory. So it's suddenly there's a huge change in the temperature, and people underestimate the cold more than the heat, I think. And yeah, as I said, the problem with the heat is it makes people think there is no cold. So it's, you know, that's generally the one that overwhelms people is the cold. It also tends to get you quicker than warmth does, you know. So you're not going to dehydrate and anything like that in minutes, whereas you can freeze to death in minutes. So
Actually
cold
quite
cold
terrible.
is cold as a hassle.
Yeah, especially if you live in a country where, you know, we're not used to the types of cold that people deal with in, say, the US and Canada and so on. So we think about it
Depends where you are, Rian. But
Yeah,
yeah, we don't in our cities and so on. We don't,
generally, yes.
you don't walk around in the snow every winter in any of our cities. Anything like that. So, the average South African is certainly not used to that sort of cold. Yeah.
So this being in South Africa, wildlife can be a thing depending on where you are. How real are wildlife risks compared to general wildlife fears? Because these two are not necessarily the same.
Yeah. Look, I think in terms of the fear is that a lot of people think that the wildlife will inevitably try and kill you. For instance, I think if you walk in the mountain and you encounter a leopard, for instance, that the leopard's immediately going to try and kill you. In most cases, the leopard would disappear so fast that generally for you to actually see a leopard would mean the leopard slipped up somewhere. He was sleeping, or his situational awareness was off, because they normally bugger off long before you get close to it. There are some animals that will obviously kill you, but it's generally out of, or it's said to be out of fear on the animal side. We're not really food for most animals, so that's for, I say that for most things, and this is generalizations, of course, but we're not really food for the animal. They don't see us as food, they see us as a threat rather. So I think that also helps you to, avoid maybe certain situations and to at least alleviate some fear. That being said, I mean, there are lots of dangerous animals, ranging from really tiny things to the big scary ones that people are worried about. But you look at, I know it's an old saying, but the people, if you think about mosquitoes kill a lot more people in Africa than lions do. And then hippos kill a lot more people than lions do. So, it's, the animals all differ as well. And, some people will say, oh, but that type of animal is moody, or that, not necessarily so. I think it's, it may be individual animals will behave different to others. And there's lots of, is it a lone old male, for instance, or is it a younger animal? Whatever, their behavior is going to be different. I think there are ones that people are always scared of. For instance, if you see people will be, say, scared of a buffalo, and rightly so. But then they'll think, oh, a kudu is fine to go try and, I don't know, touch its nose and scratch its belly or something, which I also wouldn't necessarily do.
No.
It's you're looking for trouble, So it's whereas something like a kudu would probably try and get away from you, whereas a buffalo, if you start walking towards it, may decide, look,
that's gonna backfire.
He might think, listen, this guy's really stupid, so maybe I'll leave him alone. But you understand what I'm saying? Is so it's often the smaller things that people underestimate that can also harm you. If you think about something like wild boar, for instance, and so on, that can be quite dangerous. And
or a
lot of people
warthog.
say, oh no, it's a pig. What do they do? It's a misunderstanding of it. And then I guess, okay, it depends on where you find yourself. For instance, if you look at something like a mountain leopard versus a bushveld leopard, also that's a whole different story, right? I can't really think of hearing ever of a mountain leopard attacking people, whereas bushveld leopards, they do. So, I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but I can't often think of a story of a mountain leopard going, because it's a smaller animal. Right?
I saw on Facebook, I think yesterday, I saw a story where in the Kruger National Park, at one of the picnic sites, can't recall the name now, people were doing their thing, get out of your car at the picnic sites and you do a braai and you sit and relax a little bit. That's what the picnic sites are for. And the next moment, a leopard charged in there going for a bushbuck. And there was apparently chaos. The leopard was so focused on this bushbuck that I don't think it even realized that there are people around until everybody started screaming and apparently running, which isn't the greatest thing to do with the predator because they tend to focus on that. But I think this guy was just so focused on the bushbuck. He apparently didn't get the bushbuck. But there are also, I saw pictures of this thing getting in there. So I think that can be a bit of a shocker, especially if
I
you've
think
got
that,
little kids with you.
yeah, I think that type of situation, obviously, it's unexpected and unusual. But yeah, it can certainly happen. You know, I think that leopard also may have gotten used to people being there. You know,
That's
and
possible.
maybe he's not that concerned about people anymore, but it doesn't make it. In fact, that probably
No.
makes him more dangerous.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Mm.
Do you think
Yeah.
shade and water is more important than fire, specifically in South Africa now?
Look, initially, sure, yeah, especially water is definitely more important. So getting water is more important. Look, fire, in the South African context, it only really becomes important if you need it for heat and, you know, to survive the cold. Or obviously if you start getting into a situation where you need to cook food.
Yes.
Or if you're, okay, the other thing is, don't forget, you might need to boil water, if that's your, and then fire might be an option. But finding the water would be a first priority. There's no use you make a fire and you don't have the water to boil. So I would definitely worry about water and shelter long before I worry about making fire.
Okay. I want to touch on rural travel and border crossings because, you know, that's something that many people do a lot down here in the southern tip of Africa. So when you're traveling on rural routes and you're crossing borders, do you think a survival type of mindset can be a bonus? And if so, what sort of survival mindset do you think people should adopt before something goes wrong?
Yeah, crossing, sorry, did you say borders or water?
Borders, yes.
Border, yeah. I think the first thing with border crossings is patience and lots of it. I think that maybe having that psychological thing to keep you sane, like we spoke of, is important, you know. So, but yeah, I think with the border crossings, what we've certainly have seen is that almost being prepared to camp out is, you know, have extra food, have enough water, have the capability to maybe stand and make coffee or have some coffee there or whatever, you know what I mean? It's that's kind of the first thing, at least with your border crossings. You normally have your vehicle, so you might not need to pitch a tent or anything like that, but I hope not, but you at least have a vehicle for shelter. It can take a long time, I think, and especially over the big days, you know, sort of your Christmas and Easter and times like that. So I think it also starts with maybe planning your border crossing time when you're actually going to hit the border and get across. So when I do that, I tend to plan my stay so that wherever I'm staying before the border crossing, I plan to leave according to when I want to get to the border. I'd say, am I going to cross at night or am I going to cross early hours of the morning, things like that. So even if you take a relatively easy crossing like South Africa into Namibia, for instance, which is generally fairly professional and efficient. If you get stuck there and there are 100 trucks in the border in front of you, and they all need to get inspected and so forth, that can take time, right? And it can be frustrating. Or you're crossing at Noordoever and there are 50 of these overland trucks with tourists in front of you, you know, it can be a super frustrating experience. So I try and time it generally early hours. So I'll go first light or later in the evening, and if you cross later in the evening, what do you do once you've crossed? How far do you now need to go before you can stay somewhere?
Yes,
So I think planning is quite an important thing in that situation. And then
have toilet paper.
And toilet paper.
Toilet
I
paper.
think that's the other thing that I've certainly seen and also heard from other people is that sanitation becomes a big issue, like just washing your hands and toilet paper. And if you're going to have to go into the bush, then go into the bush. Also, there might be a toilet at the border post, but if there's a 1 or 2 toilet building at the border post and there are 1,000 people sitting there, and everybody's peeing all over the toilet and whatever else, you might not even want to go in there. So you may have to want to wander into the bush and go take a felty there somewhere. But
it might be the better option. But you have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I think it's one of the big things that people forget nowadays, especially if you think when we were kids, for instance, you would travel and you'd picnic along the road, so you'd be more prepared. And when we started building all these engine stations and shell stations and all these things with the wimpy and the steers, and now everybody just drives engine station to engine station, go to the find a bar and find something to drink. And the day that is removed, you go old school.
Yeah, that water bag that you hang in the front of the car for the wind to keep it cool. Remember those?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's safe enough to say that, well, survival isn't about being tough. It's about making the right decisions at the right time. The question is, would you recognize that moment before it's too late? If you like this episode, please click the like button. Please subscribe to the channel and please smash that bell icon for us so that you can get notifications of all our new videos coming out. And as always, if you are interested in any of the training offered by Fortis and Loan Operator, there's a link in the description below. Check it out. We look forward to seeing you at a range one of these days. If you are interested in any of the training that Walt provides under Wildmedix, the website will be displayed in the top right-hand corner of the video for the duration. Give him a shot. Walt, thank you. That's it from me. Thank you so much for visiting and sharing some of your knowledge with us.
Thanks, Rian. Thanks for having me.